Welcome to Salon, Flotao Salon. I am so pumped to have you here. In this 10-minute explainer, we're unpacking a massive, literally game-changing shift happening in the auto world right now, the absolute explosion of autonomous driving. We're cutting right through the hype to look at the hard facts of what is actually landing in consumer driveways today. And to do that, we need bulletproof data, right? So everything we're exploring today comes straight from the 2025 Annual Review of Intelligent Driving, or 25 Nian Jija Niendo Pandian. This incredible deep dive was conducted by the highly respected research institution ICC, and it covers the entire calendar year from January to December of 2025. This isn't just some wild forecast. This is the reality of what literally just happened on the ground over the last 12 months. Okay, let's dive right into this. Over the next 10 minutes, we're going to hit 4 key areas. First, the urban NOA boom. Second, the big software debate, build versus buy. Third, the hardware battleground. And finally, we'll wrap up with 3 key takeaways. Section 1, the urban NOA boom, and how consumer adoption is just surging. Get this. In 2025, across the entire new energy passenger car market, an astounding 2.66 million vehicles equipped with Urban Navigate on Autopilot, or NOA, were sold. 2.66 million. That is a staggering figure for advanced driver assistance tech in just a single year. So what does that 2.66 million actually mean in the grand scheme of things? Well, it represents a 16.2% penetration rate across the market. Think about that. This is the tipping point. It completely proves that urban NOA is rapidly moving away from being some niche, early adopter gimmick and turning into a mainstream consumer expectation. If you're an automaker today, there's absolutely no way you can afford to ignore nearly a fifth of the buying market. Which brings us to the big question. Who's actually winning this race? The top 3 auto brands leading the charge in urban NOA sales are AITO, Xpeng, and Li Auto. To capture a spot in this top tier, it's not enough to just have a smart car. And you can't just have a popular car. You absolutely must have both. Incredibly high total sales volume coupled with a very high degree of standard vehicle intelligence. But what's really fascinating here are the completely contrasting strategies between these top players. Take a look at AITO. In a market where most brands rely on their cheaper models to drive volume, the bulk of AITO's sales incredibly come from their premium, high-priced M8 and N9 models. Why? Because high-level NOA is standardized on those vehicles and consumers are actively willing to pay a premium for it. Now contrast that with Li Auto, whose massive sales volume is primarily driven from the bottom up by their most affordable model, the L6. It's 2 completely different paths to dominance and they're both working. Moving right along to Section 2. Software strategies, build versus buy. We are seeing a near-perfect split in the ecosystem right now. 51.5% of the urban Ryanoa market volume comes from in-house, self-developed solutions built by the car companies themselves. But the remaining 48.5%, that relies on third-party supplier solutions. It is essentially a coin toss. The industry is completely evenly divided on the absolute best strategy for deploying these autonomous driving brains. So let's zoom in on that 48.5% third-party slice. If you're an automaker and you're buying your digital brain from someone else, who are you buying it from? Well, Huawei absolutely dominates this sector, with a massive 55% market share. They're the undeniable heavyweight champion here. Following them, we've got really strong showings from Momenta, capturing 31%, and Deeproot, also known as Yuanrong Qixing, taking a solid 11%. Now, the crucial thing to understand is exactly how Huawei achieves that massive 55% dominance. You see, they don't just sell one product. Within Huawei's ecosystem, 70% of their sales volume is driven by the highly integrated Harmony OS mode, where they have deep, fundamental involvement in the vehicle's entire ecosystem. The remaining 30% comes from their Huawei Inside, or HI mode. Basically, this tells us that automakers who partner with Huawei tend to go all in on their ecosystem, rather than just, buying parts piecemeal. All right, Section 3, the hardware battleground. This is where the chips and sensors come into play. Let's talk processing power first, the chips. This landscape is highly consolidated. Nvidia reigns supreme, with their Orin-X chip ranking #1 in total installations. Tesla, as you might expect, maintains its massive proprietary ecosystem. Huawei commands the dominant local share. Meanwhile, the new forces and smaller startups, they're really struggling to gain real traction. The data shows their impact is pretty limited, simply because they arrived late to the installation game and just don't have enough coverage across different vehicle models. So that's the brains. Let's transition to the eyes, LiDAR.
This is the crucial laser sensing tech that gives cars their 3D view of the world. In 2025, the domestic ADAS sector saw an incredible 3.35 million LiDAR units installed. Over 3 million! This hardware is literally becoming fundamentally ubiquitous in smart vehicles.
And when we break down those 3.35 million units, a very clear king emerges. Huawei leads the entire industry with 1.44 million LiDAR units installed. That grants them a staggering 43% market share right off the bat. They're followed by major dedicated hardware players like Hesai, RoboSense, and Innovision. And this brilliantly illustrates just how dynamic this market is, because Huawei wasn't actually winning the whole year. Back in the first quarter, Hesai actually captured the market lead. But then, right around March and April, AITO launched their new NOA-equipped models, like the M8 and M9. Because AITO uses Huawei's ecosystem, those car sales directly caused a massive spike for Huawei's LiDAR. That spike allowed them to usurp Hesai and absolutely lock down the #1 spot for the rest of the year.
Which brings us to a critical theme: intricate supplier dependencies. Huawei's LiDAR dominance is over 60% driven by just one auto brand, AITO. Meanwhile, RoboSense is now heavily reliant on BYD for their future hopes. Innovision actually made a massive strategic pivot. They embraced the more cost-effective 905nm standard over the superior 1550nm just to win major contracts with GAC and SAIC. And then you have Zeekr, standing completely alone as an automaker using self-developed LiDAR, entirely tied to the sales volume of their own 9X model. It's a really complex web. Finally, Section 4. 3 key takeaways. Let's talk about the ultimate value here. So, pulling it all together, here are the 3 most important findings from the 2025 data. First, mass adoption is absolutely here. Urban NOA is no longer a luxury experiment. At 2.66 million units, it's the new standard. Second, the great software divide. The industry is dead even on building their own brains versus buying from a master like Huawei. And third, hardware consolidation. The chips and the eyes of the vehicles are rapidly consolidating around mega players like Nvidia and Huawei, leaving latecomers totally in the dust. But the true value of this explainer for industry professionals boils down to just one word: alignment. Whether you're an automaker trying to sell cars or a supplier trying to sell parts, surviving this intelligence revolution requires ruthless alignment. You must either lock yourself into a dominant, closed ecosystem like Huawei's, or perfectly align yourself with high-volume standard hardware to guarantee your scale. There's really no middle ground anymore. As we look out at the sweeping skylines of the cities these intelligent cars are now navigating, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative thought. Based on the massive hardware deployments and all the shifting allegiances we've seen in 2025, who is truly going to own the smart city infrastructure of tomorrow? Will it be the car companies themselves or the tech giants supplying their brains and eyes? Thank you so much for joining me today to unpack all these fascinating insights. Keep learning, keep questioning, and as we say here at the end of the show, 桃子沙龙，马年兴隆。